Hey, good people. It's good to see you all tuning in. We are about to get started with our conversation this evening. Happy Black History Month. This is the first day of Black History Month, and this year we get 29 days. Not only is it Black History Month, good people, but it's also a national holiday in this month. No, it's not President's Day. No, it ain't Valentine's Day. It's my birthday. So I'm excited. I've got a good group of people that are going to chat with us this evening. Still drinking my tea. Today's topic of discussion is Black history, a diamond in the rough. And rather than me get on and talk to you at length about how important this month is to me, about how important my people's Black history is to me and to our country as a whole, I just said, I'm just going to find some peeps that get this, that understand this, and who value the same things I value related to this history. And we're going to have a conversation. We'll hopefully have some time for Q&A in the end, but if we don't, it's all right. Just put your questions in the chat and we'll follow up and reconnect with you. So to contextualize our conversation today, last night I was sitting at Iowa State basketball game, Big 12 showdown. Iowa State women were playing Oklahoma State University. A friend of mine said, got a ticket for you, want to drive on up and watch the game? Of course, I'm going to go watch a girls basketball game. You better believe Iowa State took them through the ringer. It was a good game. It was an excellent game. They won. But there was a point in the game where someone was asking me to give them a quote. And I was looking up some of the quotes that I hold near and dear to me, and I ran across one from Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer, if you all don't know who Fannie Lou was, she was an incredible civil rights advocate in the state of Mississippi. Barely had a middle school education, but she saw righteousness even in the midst of darkness. She was one of those individuals that felt like no matter what room she was in, she belonged in that room. In fact, she ran for office just to show people that Black folks could run for office. And the quote that I ran across last night that I read before, but for some reason it hit a little different on the eve of Black History Month. She said, every stripe in that flag represents the Black blood that has been shed. Now, this woman was born in 1917, and here she was quoting this in the 60s, not to necessarily make an inflammatory statement or tell someone something that that she thought they were going to disagree with. She wasn't trying to get a soundbite. But at that point in time in Fannie Lou's life, she realized that as Americans, we had short memories. At the time in Fannie Lou's life, Black history was not being taught and lifted up in the schools as it should have been. And so for her making that quote to let us know that Black folks was just as much a part of who America was as any other blood that was shed for this country was pivotal. What she was letting us know was that history meant something, not only to the past, but it meant something to the present. She was trying to allow Black people to understand that there was ownership in this country. And for us to have the position that we're in right now, even though it may not be the position that we want, there was things that happened leading up to that moment where it was important to remind people where we've come from and what they're capable of. You know, Black history is one of those things nowadays that people think is an option related to teaching. In fact, they think that the ownership of Black history only belongs to Black individuals. Well, we all know on this call that Black history is American history. And the conversation that we're having today is around American history and embracing this diamond in the rough, and not only embracing it, but being true to who we are and lifting up the history and taking ownership of the history in a way that doesn't mean that we're responsible for all of the mishaps that happened in our past, but we're responsible for ensuring those mishaps don't ever happen again. The folks we've got on the call, Chris. Chris is a civil rights commissioner. She works in health equity, and probably one of her most important jobs is her job as a mama. We've got Aiden, a Louisiana fella, Mexican American, works in finance, and also volunteers in voter advocacy work. We've got Lewis, a gentleman from Philly. He's a servant leader, a husband. He's also got one of those cool titles, father, and is a voice for the voiceless. We also have Rob, Chicago native, community activist, a faith leader, and also a father. We've got Nicole, AKA Nikki B. She is an educator, a servant leader, and is committed to finding ways to serving her community. And last but not least, we have Heather. Heather gets major shout outs for bringing us all together and making sure that you can hear us and see us right now on Facebook Live. She is a community organizer and she works in higher ed, and her heart is always on the side of people. I brought these folks together because one, they believe in people. I couldn't bring anybody on here that didn't believe in people. No disrespect to the folks who have little faith in folks, but we needed to inspire you all with folks who believe in people. And so I've got a few questions that I want to ask them because I want you to hear from them as it relates to why this history is so critically important for us to learn and for us to embrace. So the first question, and we're going to start with Chris on this one, what value exists in knowing Black history? Very, very simple, Chris. What value exists in knowing Black history? Let people know what your perspective is.
Absolutely. So for me, Black history expands our access to the wonderful heroes we have to look up for or up to. You mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer. I work in health equity, and so she is definitely one of my heroes. It also allows for a richer understanding of where we came from and why the things we didn't address come back to haunt us. So I'll be honest, I really didn't like history in school. I think I've always had an aversion to falsehood. So when people told me that George Washington had wooden teeth, I think I just wasn't buying it. But I think the more that now that I'm an adult and the more I read and understand about history, the more I'm able to, in my roles, navigate the constructs and issues we have today. One quote that I love is, if you come here to help me, don't waste your time. But if you come here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let's work together. And granted, people who look like me have had more liberty in this country, but we really have to come together to work and work together right now. And I always remember what you used to say, I was worth the work. And we have a lot of work to do together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Aiden, as a Mexican American, Black history isn't necessarily something that people might think is associated with you. We know different because we're talking to you today, but tell folks, what value do you see in Black history?
As a Mexican American, I definitely still am a person of color, so I definitely want to, I guess, see what commonalities we share or what struggles we've shared in the past as well in the history aspect. I also think of it as just seeing a different viewpoint, learning from that, and also becoming more empathetic as a person and knowing where we all came from. So.
Mm-hmm. Lewis, I know you grew up in a household where history was just everywhere. It wasn't just Jet Magazine and Ebony Magazine. Y'all had other stuff in the house to read. Tell us why that Black history is a value to you.
I always say, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, my entry. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't know who and where I come from. And the responsibility that holds. I think so often you look at our young people, it's not their fault. They don't truly understand their value. I understood early on that Black history didn't start with slavery, right? If we were taught that it does, you're already going into a game 30 points behind, right? Instead of feeling like you're 30 points up.
Say that one more time, Lewis. Say that one more time. If we're taught that,
when you're not taught that, when you're taught that your history started with slavery, you basically go into a game feeling like you're down 30 points already, right? And as a young person, so my son is 8 years old. If he feels like he's already down 30 points, then okay, yes, in third grade where they start to build prisons, right? From based on test scores. How do you think he's going to perform every day? How does he feel within that classroom? Do he feel like he's accepted? But fortunately for him, he has a father that helps him understand every day who he is outside of the classroom. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But yes, I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for Black history.
Good, good. Nicole, you were born and raised in rural Iowa, Ida Grove, pig farming family, close family. Why is Black history important to you? Why do you value it?
Yeah, Black history is important because if we leave that out, we're leaving part of what created this country out, and not just this country, but the richness that spans across all of our continents. We need to know what that is so we can inform our decisions. Very similar to what Chris said, like if we don't know these things, we can't make changes for the future. Our past informs that. And I think it's important for us to have the hard conversations. I think it's important for us to, know the little things, you know what I mean? Like we wouldn't have stoplights if it wasn't for a Black man. And so, not everything about Black history has to be negative. And I think sometimes that's the context that it gets put in. And there's so much positivity that light can be shed on that we need to share those stories. We need to understand what those are and not shy away from what is available to us. The more that we're informed, just like anything else, if we go into a job and we don't know how to do our job, we're going to learn about the aspects to make us better in our job. And so we need to learn about Black history because it's a part of what makes us who we are. And when we leave that out, we're leaving the narratives and the stories that make a huge impact to what is happening with us now.
Good, good. All right, Rob, man, you also grew up engulfed in Black history. You could not avoid it, even if you wanted to.
Yeah, my mama didn't play those games.
What is the value that you see in our history?
First of all, Deidre, I'd like to thank you and Heather for gathering us today and all of these wonderful panelists that you have brought here. What a great group of people to be a part of, and I'm honored to be here. To me, Black history is simple. It's what Nicole, or AKA Nikki B, said. It's the traffic light. It's the refrigerated truck. It's the automated elevator doors. It's the color monitors for our desktop computers. It's the modern day ironing board. It's the clothing hangers. It's the blood banks. It's the laser treatment for cataract surgery. It's the home security system. It is the Super Soaker children's toy. It is truly a history that is rich with creation. It is truly a history that is rich with ideas, with opportunity. And so when we do things like celebrate these moments, we celebrate the creation and the creativeness of who is bringing that here. These things didn't just fall out of the sky, but they were implanted into someone's brain and they were able to bring it to fruition. Now, I speak from a father perspective when I say this. When James Weldon Johnson and his brother John were crafting the song Lift Every Voice and Sing in 1900, they left within that room, they had a group of Black kids on one side and a group of white kids on another. And now we sit here on a call with all of us grouped together, not separated by color, able to say, let us sing until the heaven rings. So to me, that is why Black history is important.
It's a table of brotherhood right here. All right. Last but not least on this question, Heather, you grew up on the east side of Des Moines, like a hard blue collar working community. They don't take no stuff from nobody. Lee Township against the world. Go Scarlets. Like
The whole world.
Tell us why this value exists for you as a white woman.
So I had to wear it on my chest this evening. Black history is everyone's history. I'm mad that Rob took my fun fact about the super soaker because I used one of those all the time when I was a kid. And when I found out as I was looking at Black inventors that it was invented by a Black man, I was like, of course it was.
The
But
whole
I'm
point,
gonna
Black brings
say
joy. Black brings joy.
that's right. That's right. But in all seriousness though, like the value that exists in understanding and knowing Black history is, I mean, we all encapsulated it with our answers here, and it is ensuring that we know all parts of the American story. So not just uh the white version of the American story. And
Mm,
so it's critical for us to all know that. It's critical for us to know all of our histories from all perspectives. But today and this month we're going to be talking about Black history. And so I just the value that comes from that is knowing that our entire country was and continues to be created by all of us.
mm,
And so we need to be able to recognize that and acknowledge that and give people their credit when they are doing incredible things for all of us.
mhm. So the second question is a combination of, it's a two-part question. I don't know if you've all ever seen the movie Brown Sugar. When did you first fall in love with hip hop? So I'm not gonna ask you when you first fell in love with Black history, but what I will ask is, when did you first become acquainted with Black history, and what is a lesson learned that you have in actually learning Black history? I'll repeat it again. When did you first become acquainted with Black history, and what is a lesson learned? It could have been a lesson learned from when you were younger, could have been a lesson learned from where you are right now in the present. And we're going to start with Aiden on this.
That's a good question because growing up in Louisiana, I don't think Black history was readily available or accessible, really, other than learning about slavery and Harriet Tubman, really. So I want to say it wasn't until I was an adult, really, that I kind of began to seek out more information. And it even resulted in my mom and I going on a trip to Montgomery, Alabama, and going to a lot of those sites and seeking out those details and just being immersed and learning a lot of that history that we were pretty close to, that we grew up close to, but I had never really learned much because it wasn't really taught in schools. So I want to say a fact that I've learned about Black history is just, I want to say perseverance. There's a lot that
Mm,
Black people have had to persevere and just conquer and get over and succeed. So
mm, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Whew, that just brings me chills just thinking about the perseverance. I mean, the progress that we made is not without that perseverance. Even like I said earlier, we're not where we want to be, but we're equipped if we want to move forward, and that takes a great deal of perseverance. Incredible lesson. Lewis, when did you first fall in love with Black history? And what is the lesson learned from Black history?
Um, Out the womb, I believe, so growing up in Philadelphia, my mom, she would say, your name has meaning, right? This is what your name means. Your name is Louis Hassan. And I literally would hear these things all the time, and that you're a king. And it's like, okay, you hear these things, and now what does that mean? And I always say, like, right, your past and your parents, essentially also shape who you are today. So I always say, like, even the confrontational in me is not because I want to be confrontational, it's because it's when I know something's not right, right? I refuse not to say something. So I remember, growing up in Philly, Declaration of Independence, right? So we would go on these trips to go see the Declaration of Independence and the Liberty Bell. And I remember early, second grade, my mom saying that has nothing to do with us, because when your ancestors came here, they did not have, they did not also have the pursuit of life, happiness, and liberty, and it does not apply to us. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And as I got older, she would constantly give me more information on why that document wasn't for us. And as history, progressed, how laws were made to keep us away from certain things, and to make sure we weren't as successful as we could be. So and it's going on today. So when I look at Black history, I learned a little bit in school about Black history, right? Everybody learned about Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. We would go a little bit deeper, you know, because I was in the Black community. We learned about Malcolm X, right? Adam C.J. Walker. But from you know, just the nooks and cranny, you know, of truly understanding my history and my worth, like I learned that from home and in the Black church, that I'm sure Rob would talk about, you know, later on. But without that representation and without my mom and her learning and being able to be exposed to our true history, it would have been, I wouldn't have been as successful in understanding Black history. It just would have been another month. So my mom would say all the time, like, we Black all the time. We Black 12 months out the year, and we're going to learn. I have to do book reports every summer on a new Black author or a new Black inventor. So it wasn't just like a month for us at all. Like it was more or less like we were ingrained in our Blackness, you know, 12 months out the year.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. Good. Thank you, Lewis. Nicole, when did you first learn Black history? Was it in Ida Grove? Was it in Ida Grove?
Very similar to Aiden, I would say it was not on the history curriculum in small town. You know, we may have learned about the Civil War and slavery and MLK, but it wasn't even, you know, a deep conversation where could really learn. It was when I got to college that I really was able to learn more about different people, you know, more about Black history. I took an African American course when I was an undergrad too. And I think, you know, the lessons that
Wait a minute. So Ida Grove undergrad student goes to Iowa State University and takes a African American studies class. Like, what compelled you to do that?
I mean, one, it was part of we had to have a U.S. diversity requirement. And also the people that I was around when I was at school, you know, I wanted to learn more about the things that were important to them, you know, their history and their legacy. And that burden shouldn't be put on them to say, hey, Deidre, tell me what Black history is. And so, you know, taking it upon myself to take a opportunity to, you know, indulge myself in a different way where I could learn, be in an environment with other people who maybe look like me, who were trying to learn, but also people who didn't look like me that were, you know, that conversations were enhanced by being around those different individuals, you know, Black and brown folks that were also in my class. But it might have been a requirement, but for me, it was more important. You know, when I got to college, my RA was a Black woman, you know, and I wanted to learn more about what that meant for who she was. And again, I'm not wanting to put the burden on somebody else to teach me. I can learn for myself if I choose. And then when I'm learning things, we can engage in different conversation. And I think, you know, by taking that moment to really learn the history and its impact, it really makes you look at things different in how you move and how you advocate and how you take up space and all of these different types of things. And it's like little things that we don't, you know, have to take, you know, I don't have to be an African American studies, you know, major to learn what Black history is. I can watch a TED Talk, I can take a class, I can do, you know, all of these little things. And so, you know, in learning all of that, it helped me figure out, like, how do I, you know, support those around me that have that identity. And it really showed me a lot about resiliency and innovation, and the contributions that Black Americans made to our country. So,
yeah, you know, we talk about the contributions. I think it's important, and you all reiterated it in more ways than one, but so often Black history is encapsulated by the struggle and the strife. And so many Americans are fixated on the point of, you can't add value, what value do you have? So if we're not talking about the value that Blacks have added to our country, the mindset is that either one, they're not capable, and or two, they're undeserving of reaping the benefits of what this country has to offer. And so in really revealing the value, it can help shift the mindset of whether or not people believe they're deserving. Now, at the end of the day, from my belief, God says you're deserving, but some people lean a little bit more than that. And so I think that's a really critical point to make. Rob, Rob, talk to me a little bit about, hold on, we've already talked. Did I already go? No, Rob, yes. Tell me when you first got connected with Black history and what lesson learned that you've gotten out of it.
Deidre, I'll start with this. My mother was very engulfed into our community in Chicago. And from whether it's from the bayous of Louisiana, whether it's from the blues in Mississippi, or the Liberty Bell and the brotherly love of Philly, or whether it's from the streets of Chicago with the Sears Tower or the cornfields of Iowa, she would always say one simple thing is that if you can choose to be anything in this world, choose to be kind, choose to love on one another. And she got that because of the history that she had endured herself. Many of you know that Chicago was one of the most segregated cities in the country. Blacks stayed on one side and whites stayed on another. One of the most well-known streets in Chicago was 67th Street, or known as Marquette Avenue in Chicago. And my mother stayed on the other side of Marquette, and they would tell the stories of how if you got caught crossing the street of Marquette to go into a white area, you were hit with bricks, you were hit with rocks, they would try to hit you with cars, and that there were many a days where her and her siblings, my aunts and uncles and cousins, who had to fight their way back to just a living reality of what it looked like in this world. So if we do not acknowledge Black history, then we do a disservice to those who had to fight their way through this, who had to live through traumatic times so that we could sit on a platform called Zoom right at 4 years removed from COVID and talk about the importance of Black history. It is because it is not just because folks died, it's not just because folks fought, but it is because folks lived through it. It is because folks moved through it. Folks got an opportunity to push their way through it. And so me coming up in Chicago under a mom who was engulfed in it, who was saturated in it, who marched with Jesse and was right there on the front line, this is something that now I find myself bringing my child to so many other events, bringing my sons and my nieces and nephews to all of these events so that they can also see that, yes, Martin Luther, yes, Malcolm X, yes, Fannie Lou, yes, Coretta Scott, yes, Harriet Tubman were there, but you got people like Deidre DeGio who has charted a path for folks to run across this state of Iowa. You got people like Akayo who has sat and served in our state for the longest serving state representative. You got people like Renee Hartman who has charted a path in West Des Moines, becoming the first African-American woman, and Robert Webb becoming the first African-American man to serve on city councils. And so right here, they have an opportunity to see what they can become because people like you, people like Lewis, have lived through things that have pushed us to where we are today.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I'm hearing the perseverance even more. Perseverance. All right, so now we're going to go to Heather on this question. Tell me when you first got connected with Black history and what is a lesson learned from your learnings?
Yeah. So similarly to what Aiden and Nicole have already talked about, formally, I never really got a lot of direct Black history teaching until I got to college. But as I'm listening to everybody and I'm kind of reflecting on my own upbringing, I had an opportunity when I was in junior high school. I went to Amos Hyatt here in Des Moines, and at the time I was in the racial minority, and that was a new experience for me as a white kid living in Pleasant Hill. But what I am thinking about as I've been listening to everybody talk is that I literally was experiencing Black history as it was going in this metro, right? Like, I was coming up when Preston Daniels was elected the first Black mayor of Des Moines. I was I was lucky to have the Reverend Alex Hanna be my vice principal when I was at East High School. And so like I had people that were making differences. And so even though technically I wasn't being taught Black history, I was seeing it in action. And I've
Mhm.
seen people that I've come up with making their own history. I keep thinking about Craig Farley as we're talking here. He's somebody I went to junior high school with, and he is continuing to just like make strides in collecting stories in this community and preserving our history in this community. And so while I wasn't formally taught it until college, I've been banging that drum ever since because it is so imperative for us to continue to uplift each other and for people to see themselves as we are moving about this world. And so I will say that one lesson that I have learned in learning Black history, both from studying it, but also just living, is like what real love is. Like the action of love is something that I have taken from not only the study of Black history, but the living of the people around me that continue to make my life better and love on me and love in that action way for our community. Like that's probably the biggest lesson that I have taken and will continue to take with me forever.
That's sweet. I never thought of that. That's really sweet. Chris, last but not least on this question, tell me when you first got connected with Black history and what's a lesson learned from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of in the middle. I was actually 7 years old. I moved from at that time all white Johnston, teachers and students alike, to Monroe Elementary School. And I had a Black principal, I had Black playground monitors, and my favorite teacher, Mrs. Jackson, was also Black. And I have to say she was my favorite teacher because she just brought so much joy to learning. And so I think that because of their gentle guidance and because of their presence, I was able to learn beyond what was required in the curriculum. And I started to really seek out books that were not quite on those approved lists, but allowed me to have a little bit more context in the things that they talked about. So as far as one of my lessons learned, I work in health equity in Washington, D.C. So Black history is so critical to my
Mm.
work. But I
How?
also have a very
Tell us how.
personal. Yeah, well, just because we mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer at the start of this broadcast, and so we need to understand how different like racism aspects affected women's reproductive health. We need to understand how there's a lack of trust because not only were people not allowed to go to certain medical institutions, but the professional organizations did not allow Black professionals into those organizations. So there's a lot of different things that happen within that we need to understand to navigate the equities
Mm.
and even the stress that racism causes with that. So there's that, but I also have a really personal piece of Black history and connection. So I never knew my grandparents; they passed before I was born. But my great grandparents came from Sweden to Buxton, Iowa. And I want to give out a shout out to my friend Rochelle Chase, who wrote about Buxton and her research and her work on the Black Utopia here in Iowa really allowed me to learn more about my family history. So reading her book, I was able to understand a little bit about how when people from Sweden came to work in the mines and the different things that were happening there, um, it really gives me hope. It happened here in Iowa where we peacefully not only coexisted, but we were really equals. And I think because there was no tolerance for bigotry, it was just a really beautiful society, and it gives me hope that we can get back to there one day.
Good. No, very interesting perspective on health equity and Buxton. I wish we had enough time to talk about Buxton. It was literally a Black utopia, a community that had it figured out, and honestly, just over time, was decimated. And so, moving on in our conversation, if you're just now popping in, you're popping into a conversation amongst good people who believe in people, talking about the importance of Black history, taking ownership of Black history. Now, you're probably wondering, Deidre, you've got white folks on here. You've got a man who doesn't quite look like, we're not sure what he is. He's Mexican, by the way. You've got him on here. What does he have to do with Black history? What do they have to do with Black history? Well, the fact of the matter is these folks on this call right now believe that Black history is all of our history. And so we're talking about why we value it, why it's important. This is the first day of Black History Month, and many of us live Black history on a day-to-day basis. But since we got a whole 29 days this go around to talk about it, we're going to talk about it because we might as well. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper. And I'm going to talk about education because many of you all brought up school. I didn't ask you to bring up school, but you brought up school. I will never forget a friend of mine, a dear, dear friend of mine in undergrad. You know, she presented as Black first. She said, I'm Black. But after that, she was a global citizen. Now, mind you, she spoke no other languages. She, I don't think, had been out of the country at this time, but she was aspiring to be a global citizen by increasing her knowledge of things that were happening around her. She was committed to this fact. She wanted to learn more and more and more. And so when we think about our young people in K through 12, and the fact that we want American kids to be the best and the brightest, to be able to compete against any country in the world, the fact that we want our state kids to be the best and brightest, to compete against every state in the world, the K through 12 experience is the best time to get them the education they need to equip them for their future. But needless to say, only 12 states across the country. Now, you haven't checked lately. We got 50. We ain't kicked anybody out. We hadn't added anybody. We got 50 states. And 12 states in this country require Black history as a part of their curriculum. We're not going to talk about the states who are banning it because they're not banning it for good. But the people who are committed to teaching it, only 12 of them are doing it. I'm curious for our parents and our educators on the phone. Why, or is it important for us to purposely, specifically, inherently embed Black history into our curriculum, starting with kindergarten, going all the way up to 12th grade? I only asked this question because I was responsible for embedding vote. Well, I wasn't responsible. I was part of a committee with the state to embed voting and civic engagement and financial education into the curriculum. And we literally took every grade and we made it grade specific. Kindergartners were learning about financial education just like 12th graders were learning financial education. Why is it important for us to identify with our history and teach it to our students? So I'm going to start here with a parent, Lewis, because you started the conversation on at the beginning on teaching your son.
I know we're taught to not ask questions with the question, right? I don't believe in that. Yeah. I think I always say, why are they working so hard for Black history not to be taught in schools? Like, has anyone asked that question? Like, what's the problem with learning history? Why don't we want to learn history? We learn history from K through 12, right? History, but yet we have laws and we have petitions, and we have so much hatred for learning, like for our children, especially white children, to learn Black history in schools. And I just find that problematic, right? And these are my thoughts. I want to say this, right? I don't want people to get confused. Like, these are Deidre's thoughts when I say this statement. I put something on Instagram recently, and I said, protect Black children from guns like politicians try to protect white children from learning about Black history.
There is a supreme motivation there.
Yes. And I don't know if we've asked the right questions of why, or we've heard their answers of why. What is the problem with, because Black history is history, right? Let's just be honest, it's history. Yet we've had to force a whole month behind Black history because it's never been taught. Going back to, Brown versus Board of Education, when we became separate but equal, and then we went into schools that we were supposed to be equal, but we were never treated equal, and still not. Let's be honest. So
Mhm.
at the end of the day, yes, I would love Black history to be taught in schools if it's taught correctly. If my child has a teacher like he has at Walnut Street, shout out to Ms. Danielson, the music teacher at Walnut Street, when my son came home and said, "Daddy, I want to listen to Young, Gifted, and Black."
Mm.
Excuse me? He said, "Daddy, I want to listen to Young, Gifted, and Black." I said, "Well, which version?" He said, and he knew there was more than one. And we played it, and I had tears in my eyes for 3 minutes. And
Just 3 minutes.
for 3 minutes of the song. And recently we were driving to school. He said, "Daddy, can we listen to Young, Gifted, and Black?" And I said, "Because you're young, gifted, and Black, aren't you?" He's like, "Yes, of course." Like, he knew, like, this is not a thing for him. But that was taught in school. Well, right? That part was taught. So we're teaching it correctly. And we're not going to just give them the fluff. And we're not going to just talk about Martin Luther King, and which is, again, those are great things. But if we're going to, she was intentional. That her class wasn't all young Black students. It was all students. And she was intentional with all her students singing that song. I said, "Zai, y'all sung that song?" You're like, "Yeah." He's like, "I sung it. And Chris sung it. Chris don't look like you." So he was young, gifted, and Black during that day too, huh? He's like, "Yeah, everyone was young, gifted, and Black, Daddy." Cool. Because we all originated in Africa too. But that's another. But on the end of the day, if it's going to be taught with intentionality, and if it's going to be taught as not just a checklist of a thing, and if it's truly embedded in history, right? That you can't shy away from history. You can't shy away from, redlining. You can't shy away from these. Doesn't mean that, at the end of the day, it's your fault. No, but our kids need to understand the atrocities and the things that's happening to them, and look how we've overcome, right? And it was something growing up innately I wanted to do. Like, that was intrinsic motivation, because I knew ancestors that couldn't read. Like, I was taught that, like, there was people that died because they couldn't read. So how dare you not read a book? I do not want to write this book report in the summertime. These things I've heard as a kid. Like, how dare you, when that, it was, your ancestors went through so much to put you in this position. And I was like, you're right.
Mm-hmm. Good. Chris, what are your thoughts on this? My presumption, I don't want to presume. I'm just going to let you say what you need to say related to whether or not you think your daughter should be learning Black history in school.
Yeah, absolutely. She absolutely should. And my children are a mix of Scandinavian, Latino, and Asian, so they definitely are not white passing. But they need to learn this. We need different perspectives on events to understand the truth. And it's like I tell all three of my children, you need to have three different news sources, and the truth is somewhere among all of those. And this is the same thing with perspectives. I almost feel like in Iowa we backtracked due to House File H02 a couple of years ago, and then the book bans, because some of those books that are banned are the same kinds of books that I use to teach myself different aspects of American history as well. History is inherently divisive. We need to deal with that so we don't make the same mistakes of the past. But I think that despite all these things, I am so thrilled with the education my daughter is receiving. I lived for a long time in North Carolina, and one time online during the pandemic, the music teacher was teaching them step. And it was just so wonderful to hear, that music and hear the dance and things that I was used to in North Carolina. They come back with so many different books from different perspectives, and it's definitely Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, but also other ways to teach Black history. And so I'm very, very much hopeful for our future.
Awesome. Nicole, as an educator in the space of higher ed, you're seeing students who are coming into your institution who experience K through 12. Is it important for them to learn this history when they come to y'all's doorsteps?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the door opens to that K-12 education, and we can help, further that, when they get into the higher ed institutions. I mean, I think, similar to Lewis, I don't, not to ask a question, but like, why is there so much fear around teaching history that is not white centered? Our students that come into the higher education realm, they should have options to explore and learn what they want to learn. And again, we hope that's happening, at least setting some kind of foundation in the K-12. But if it doesn't, this is their chance. What other Nicoles are out there that can come to college and be able to learn about things that they weren't able to learn about in their communities? And I think, we can, whether it's K-12 or higher education, we see a love for Black culture, but we don't want to understand what informs the Black culture and why things exist. And so I think making sure that those opportunities exist, if we're going to dance to a hip hop song, that we understand where did hip hop come from, and why was that music genre created? And I think like even in that K-12 space, we can have those conversations. Lewis's son should, get to hear those things and learn those things when he's in school, but so should his peers, so that they understand, his perspective and his culture. And so I think we're missing opportunities when we try to keep the conversation away in a way that I feel is from fear versus like wanting to create understanding. And so I just always go back, like, what's the fear? What's the fear of us really understanding what Black history is, how it is informed our history overall, and then moving forward into the impact that Black history will continue to make on this country. There's a lot of things that are seen and done because Black women in particular see them and take on that burden, but just Black people in general, we just look to them for guidance and different things, but don't give the accolades that they are deserved. And I think part of in that K-12 education, if they understand where it's coming from, I think you appreciate it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. So, good people, I've told our amazing esteemed panelists that we were going to be under an hour. So we're going to speed this up a little bit and get everything that we need to get out, because as you've heard, we've got quite a few parents on the line today. So they got to get back to their babies. Rob, we're going to connect with you next. So, I've been thinking a lot, Rob. I've been thinking a lot. Sometimes I overthink things, and I am a woman of faith, and I'm bewildered why we are taking heed of an important text in our faith called the Bible, yet these elected officials are bearing the cross. They are citing scripture, and these same elected officials are unwilling to accept histories like this. I'm bewildered by this fact. And I'm not a preacher, but there is a scripture, Hosea 4:6, that says, my people are destroyed from a lack of knowledge. So help me come to terms. Help me come to terms from a person of faith's perspective. Why can't we have this history and our history, right? What's so wrong with that? Tell me what the dichotomy is.
Well, first of all, that is so it's so loaded into what Gina Stewart said. So Gina Stewart, for those who don't know, was the first Black woman preacher to ever preach at the National Baptist Association in 129 years. In the history of that 129 years, Gina Stewart stood on that stage, and this is what she said. She said, if you are racist, then say you are racist. If you're homophobic, say you're homophobic. If you're Islamophobic, say you're Islamophobic. If you don't like people, just say that you don't like people. But stop hiding behind religion and religiosity language that allows you space to say and discriminate against people. I'll put it in the words of Bishop McKissick out in Florida when he was speaking to their governor, when he said to their governor, if your policy is a policy that makes space and room to discriminate against people's humanity, to make them feel like it is unsafe for them to exist, then your public policy is wrong, and don't hide it behind God.
Ooh.
So when we come to this realization that there was a Black man who was prosecuted for a crime that he didn't commit, drugged through the streets of folks who loved him one week and hated him the next, and then put on a cross to die for folks who still continue to invoke his name in wrong and disrespectful ways, just for us to still yell out, we have to love again. We are in a dangerous place when we use this same Black man to tell somebody else you don't have the right to exist and it is okay for us to discriminate against you. So if we're going to look at history, if we look at the history of who, and let's just say who a lot of whose name they invoke, which is Jesus the Christ, if we look at the history of Jesus the Christ, on who he interacted with, on who he ate with, on who he went to go see, who he went to even pull close to him, it was the very people that we allow legislation to discriminate against and to pass laws to not teach in our schools. We have a problem. And so from a faith standpoint, look, I'm gonna be honest. I was brought up by Janice Deborah Johnson, and I firmly believe that faith without works is dead. And so if we really believe in Black history, then you must believe in good public policy. If you really believe in Black history, then you must believe that our churches must have a deeper look into how we are allowing folks to be discriminated against, and we don't stand up and stand for them the same way Jesus would have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you bringing up those quotes. I'm gonna look a little deeper into them because I've just been perplexed. I've been perplexed because, you know, when you think about having a platform to do good and to use it for good, our elected officials need God just like anybody else. Doctors need doctors, lawyers need lawyers, preachers need preachers. Like, and so if they are committed, like I said, bearing this cross, because not everybody is a Christian, but I'm talking about the ones who are bearing the cross around their neck and got the matching earrings associated with them. I just want them to be lifted up in this space and really stand for good in a way that they're not standing for it right now. And so I, you know, while it takes a village to get this done, the church is not excommunicated from being a part of this process. Folks, I'm glad you were able to stop in and listen to this value that we're talking about, this diamond in a rough. Most people are putting this diamond in this encapsulated rough, and we want it to shine and reveal itself. This thing called Black history. You know, when you go to the doctor, they ask for your medical history. If you have a child and you take your child to the doctor, they ask for your medical history. Why? Because they're trying to help solve a problem for you. And without knowing your history, it makes it difficult. And when you meet someone for the first time, some form or fashion, you ask for their dating history. Some of y'all are asking for some medical records associated with that history. Why? Because it informs who they are. It informs where you would like to go. And when you go and try to get insurance, or sometimes when you go and try to get a job, auto insurance, they ask for your driving history. History is important in various platforms and various aspects of our lives. Some of y'all, browser history is important to you. Regardless, history is something that not only helps us understand the past, it helps us take ownership of who we are in the present so that we can right the wrongs of the past and move us forward. You know, I have a pastor who often says it's not about perfection, it's about progression. This country is not perfect. I don't know if it ever will be perfect. But so long as we are committed to adding value, so long as we're committed to not hiding behind the mistakes of our ancestors, the missteps, so long as we are committed to lifting up the history that brings us joy, that brings credence to our value, that's only going to help each and every one of us. Not one of us, not two of us. It's going to help each and every one of us. And so I hope hearing this conversation for parents out there, maybe you figured out some ways to help advance Black history in your household, knowing it may not be taught in school. For educators out there, it's my hope that you've really found some value and some motivation into helping your students really become who they are by reminding them of where their people have been. And for our elected officials out there, man, I hope you see people before you see politics in this conversation. I hope you're moved to want to do something about this. It's not about power. Again, it's about progress. And for everybody else out there, keep holding strong to what you believe in. Continue to speak truth to power and ensure that everybody around you knows that Black history is all of our history. We got 28 more days to celebrate. Thanks again to all of our special guests for popping in. You know, I asked them to do this morning, and they say, yes, y'all, they're really, really, really good people. All right, y'all, have a good night.